The deputies arrived at my lakeside cabin expecting to break up a burglary in progress. Instead, they found Margaret Peton, president of the Pine Ridge HOA, lounging in a silk robe while pouring herself a glass of wine in my kitchen. Her husband, Gerald, was out back grilling ribeye steaks on my deck, and their teenage son, Tyler, was screaming something about victory royals into his gaming headset from my living room. The kicker: Margaret had called 911 herself, claiming I was the intruder. The actual intruder was standing there in designer slippers, sipping my $30 Pinot Noir while I stood on my own porch holding the deed to the property I had purchased with cash 14 months ago. My name is Daniel Harper, and at 41 years old, I had finally achieved my dream of owning a cabin away from the chaos of suburban life. I work as a wildlife illustrator, creating detailed drawings of birds and forest creatures for nature magazines and field guides. The solitude of my lakeside retreat in Pine Ridge was perfect for my work. I only ventured into town when I needed art supplies or groceries, preferring the company of the occasional deer that wandered through my property to the drama of neighborhood politics. The cabin sat on 2 acres of wooded land, technically outside the HOA boundaries, which meant I paid property taxes, but wasn't subject to their endless rules about lawn height and mailbox colors. Margaret Peton had been a thorn in my side since the day I moved in. She insisted my cabin was an eyesore that brought down property values, despite the fact that it looked like something from a rustic living magazine. She complained about everything from the natural wildflower garden I maintained to the bird feeders that attracted cardinals and blue jays. When I politely informed her that my property wasn't part of the HOA, she turned an alarming shade of purple and stormed off, muttering about finding a way to fix this oversight. The trouble really started when I announced I would be gone for 2 weeks on a fishing trip to Lake Morrison. I mentioned it casually to my neighbor Bill, who must have told his wife, who definitely told Margaret. 3 days before I left, I received a letter from Margaret claiming that vacant dwellings exceeding 7 days of non-occupancy could be subject to reassignment under HOA Resolution 14B. The document was complete nonsense, filled with legal-sounding jargon that meant absolutely nothing. She had attached something called an occupancy authorization form with signatures from 2 board members who later admitted they thought they were signing up for a neighborhood watch program. While I was gone, Margaret executed her plan with military precision. She hired a locksmith claiming she was the property manager and had lost her keys. She called the utility companies and had the accounts transferred to her husband's name, presenting forged lease documents. She moved her family's overflow furniture into my cabin, including a massive leather recliner that she placed right where my handmade hammock used to hang. She even had the audacity to install a welcome sign in my driveway that read, "Welcome to the Peton Family Lake House" in flowing script. The extent of her delusion became clear when I talked to other neighbors later. Margaret had hosted 2 wine tasting events at my cabin, charging $50 per person for what she called an exclusive lakefront experience. She organized a weekend wellness retreat where she taught yoga on my deck at sunrise. She told everyone who would listen that I had sold the property to her family through a private off-market deal to avoid real estate fees. Several neighbors found it suspicious, but Margaret was known for her vindictive streak, and nobody wanted to become her next target. I cut my fishing trip short by 2 days when Bill texted me a photo of a Range Rover parked in my driveway with a message thought, "You should know." The 3-hour drive back felt like an eternity. When I pulled up to my own home, I could barely process what I was seeing. My rustic wooden furniture had been replaced with modern pieces that looked completely out of place. Through the window, I could see Tyler sprawled on a gaming chair I had never owned, wearing my vintage fishing vest as some kind of ironic fashion statement. Margaret's Pomeranian, Princess Buttercup, was running around wearing one of my wool socks as a makeshift sweater. I didn't lose my temper, though every fiber of my being wanted to kick down my own door. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started documenting everything. I took photos of the Range Rover's license plate, the new furniture visible through the windows, and the security camera Margaret had installed above my door, which was probably recording me at that very moment. I called the sheriff's office and calmly explained that someone had broken into my home and changed the locks while I was away. The dispatcher assured me units were on the way. Margaret must have seen me through the window because within minutes, she was on the phone with 911, her voice shrill enough that I could hear it from outside. She claimed a dangerous vagrant was threatening her family at their vacation property, demanding immediate police response. She described me as aggressive and possibly armed, which was rich considering I was standing peacefully in my own driveway holding nothing more threatening than a tackle box and a fishing rod. 4 deputies arrived within 10 minutes, 2 responding to my call and 2 Margaret's. I approached them with my hands visible, introduced myself, and handed over my driver's license along with the original deed to the property. I also showed them photos on my phone from the past year, including ones of me building a deck addition and hosting my sister's family for the 4th of July. Margaret burst out of my front door in her silk robe, waving a crumpled HOA newsletter with Community Cabin's initiatives scrolled in the margins with purple ink. The lead deputy, a nonsense woman named Deputy Morrison, examined both sets of documents. She looked at Margaret's newsletter, then at my official deed, then back at the newsletter. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably 30 seconds. Finally, she turned to Margaret and said in a tone that could freeze water that this was not her house, and she had committed breaking and entering, criminal trespass, and likely fraud. Margaret's face went from red to white to gray in the span of 3 seconds before she collapsed dramatically into my carefully maintained Elia bushes. While Gerald helped Margaret to her feet, Deputy Morrison called for additional units and a detective. What started as a simple trespassing case was about to become much more complicated. As the investigation unfolded over the next few hours, the scope of Margaret's scheme became clear. She hadn't just moved into my cabin, she had been running a business from it. Tyler, eager to distance himself from his parents' legal troubles, showed the deputies his phone, which contained screenshots of an Airbnb listing for my cabin. Margaret had listed my home as Scandinavian chic lakefront haven, and was charging $300 per night. The listing had 17 reviews, most of them positive, though several mentioned the strange binder of rules the host insisted guests follow, including no eye contact after 9 p.m. and mandatory participation in morning gratitude circles. She had earned over $4,000 in the 2 weeks I was gone. Money that had gone directly into her personal account. My lawyer, whom I called immediately after the deputies secured the scene, arrived within an hour. Jackson Reeves was a former prosecutor who specialized in property law, and his eyes lit up like Christmas morning when I showed him the evidence. Not only had Margaret committed criminal trespass and fraud, but by using the mail to send those fake HOA documents, she had potentially committed mail fraud, a federal offense. The Airbnb scheme added wire fraud to the mix since the payments had crossed state lines. The investigation revealed even more damaging details. Margaret had used her position as HOA president to access the neighborhood directory and had sent emails to the entire board inviting them to a strategic planning retreat at the newly acquired community cabin. She had used official HOA letterhead, which meant she had involved the entire organization in her criminal enterprise. 3 board members had actually attended a wine and cheese evening at my cabin, though they claimed they thought it was a legitimate HOA event. The criminal charges were just the beginning of Margaret's problems. The HOA's insurance company launched their own investigation, concerned about liability issues. The other homeowners were furious when they learned their HOA president had potentially exposed them all to lawsuits. An emergency board meeting was called for the following Tuesday, and the agenda had only one item: the immediate removal of Margaret Peton as president and board member. I attended that meeting as a guest, sitting in the back row with my lawyer. The community center was packed with standing room only as over 200 residents showed up to witness Margaret's downfall. She tried to defend herself, claiming she had acted in the best interests of the community and that my cabin had been an abandoned eyesore. Several residents actually laughed out loud at this, including Bill, who pointed out that I had been gone for less than 2 weeks and the property was immaculate. The vote to remove Margaret was unanimous, with even her usual allies voting against her. Someone had already made motion to revoke the Peton family's HOA membership entirely, which passed with only one dissenting vote from Margaret's friend, Linda, who abstained rather than vote no. Margaret tried to storm out dramatically, but the door was locked from the outside, and she had to wait awkwardly while someone found the key. The criminal case proceeded quickly. The evidence was overwhelming, and Margaret's lawyer convinced her to take a plea deal rather than risk a trial. She pleaded guilty to criminal trespass, fraud, and theft by deception. Gerald, who had been charged as an accomplice, pleaded to a lesser charge of receiving stolen property. The judge, clearly disgusted by the abuse of power and the violation of property rights, was not lenient. Margaret was sentenced to 18 months in prison, though she would likely serve only 6 with good behavior, plus 3 years of probation. She was ordered to pay $47,000 in restitution, which included the money she had made from the Airbnb scheme, the cost of changing my locks back, cleaning and repairs, and my legal fees. She was also banned from serving on any HOA board in the state for life. When the judge read the sentence, Margaret let out a wail that could be heard in the hallway and collapsed into her lawyer's arms, sobbing about the injustice of it.